Hi everyone, welcome to our second video for week 4. And today we're going to talk about confidence intervals. What is a confidence interval? So a confidence interval is the most common type of interval estimate. And we talked about interval estimates in our last video. Confidence intervals are centered around the sample statistic that corresponds to the population parameter we are wanting to estimate. So if we're estimating a population mean, our confidence interval is centered around the sample mean. If we're estimating a population proportion, our confidence interval is going to be centered around the sample proportion. For example, a confidence interval for a population mean would look like the sample mean minus our margin of error is less than the population mean is less than the sample mean plus the margin of error. Another way to write this is the sample mean plus or minus the margin of error. And then the notation in our textbook is writing it as an ordered pair. The lower bound, sample mean minus the margin of error, comma, the upper bound, sample mean plus the margin of error. You're going to see me default to the first notation. The lower bound is less than the population parameter is less than the upper bound, because that's how I learned how to do it when I took statistics. And so that's kind of the default in my brain. But any of these three notations means the same thing. And I don't have a preference for what you use. Any of these three notations is okay. I'm expecting most of you are probably going to use the last just because that's what your calculator is going to default to. We're going to calculate confidence intervals for two population proportions or population parameters, sorry, for means and for proportions. These are not the only confidence intervals we can calculate. You can construct confidence intervals for standard deviations and variances as well. And if you're interested in how to do that, feel free to contact me. I have that information for you, but it's not on our course record. And so I'm not going to present it. Just kind of an overview of proportion. A proportion is a percentage of people or objects that have the characteristic that we are interested in studying. We usually express proportions in decimal forms, and we will talk more about these when we get to confidence intervals for proportion. But we have seen these before. Proportions are related to probabilities. And when we talk about things like the proportion of voters who voted for a candidate, right? The percentage of people who voted for a candidate is a proportion, right? The percentage of people who are left-handed, that's a proportion. So this is the value we're familiar with. Now we're going to talk about how to estimate it for a population. The margin of error, which is how we construct our range of values, depends on three things. And we introduced this in the last video. We know it depends on the standard deviation. More variable populations will require wider intervals. Sample size. So the bigger your sample, the smaller your range needs to be. And then how confident we want to be that our interval actually contains the population parameter. And the more confident we want to be, the wider our interval needs to be. You are going to see some notation in word problems where you're asked to find the confidence interval for the true parameter. Construct a confidence interval for the true mean. Construct a confidence interval for the true proportion. When they say true, they mean population. So they're wanting you to estimate the value for the population. The formula for that margin of error, how we calculate it, is going to depend on which population parameter we are estimating, mean or proportion. It's also going to depend on what we know about that population. For the mean, whether or not we know that population standard deviation is going to play a role in how we find that margin of error. The upside for us in 2023 is that we can bypass calculating the margin of error by hand by using a calculator or computer to do the entire confidence interval construction for us. So we won't need to look up z-values or t-scores. We won't have to calculate the margin of error by hand or add it or subtract it to our sample value. We're going to plug in the information given to us in the word problem, and the technology is going to construct the entire confidence interval for us. In coming videos, I am going to show you how to do it by hand. So I think it's important to understand where those numbers in our calculator are coming from. But I am expecting that everybody's using technology to do this. So I don't want you to feel pressured to do it by hand if you're not comfortable with that. If you have any questions on the videos this week or anything you see in the textbook or in Canvas, please let me know. Again, I have office hours Tuesday and Thursday. You can always email me to set up a time to meet if those don't work for you. And you can always email or text message me. I hope you have a good week, and I will see you in the next video.